What is up? It's NFL Week 8. I'm Ryan Weisse, and this is Club Fantasy's Streams of the Week. You made it. You made it through Week 7. You made it through the bipocalypse. You either won or you lost, but we're still streaming. Welcome back. So it wasn't as bad a week, I think, as everyone thought it was going to be. It certainly wasn't the best possible week. But even for streams where there was such high rostership all over the place, I feel like we did pretty well. Last week at quarterback, we hit 2 out of 5, not our best. Our stream of the week, Teddy Bridgewater, managed to pull out at the very end of the game with the Browns with a couple of touchdowns, save us a little bit there. We hit 4 out of 5 on the tight ends, including Ricky Seals-Jones with the big win. And then we hit 3 out of 5 on defense. Overall, again, not my best week, not my worst week. If you started every one of those players, you scored 30 fantasy points. My goal is 35 to 40. Let's see if we can do a little bit better this week. So just a reminder, every player I'm about to mention was available in about 50% of Yahoo leagues as of Wednesday after waivers have run. Every one of these guys I'm going to list from 5 to 1, with the number 1 guy being my stream of the week. And I'm going to give you quarterbacks, tight ends, and defense. We're going to start with the quarterbacks. Number 5 is going to be Jameis Winston, revenge game time, taking on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Tampa Bay does give up quite a few points to the quarterback in fantasy. Winston has been more missed than hit this year, but he has had 2 really big games. And if there was ever going to be motivation, it's going to be this week taking on the Buccaneers. Number 4 is going to be Ben Roethlisberger taking on the Cleveland Browns. Ben is available quite a bit because A, he hasn't played all that well, and B, he was on bye last week. That might come up again later. The Browns defense, again, they just allowed a pretty decent week to Teddy Bridgewater, even though they've played very well. Chase Claypool tends to play well against the Browns. I'm expecting big games from Pat Freiermuth on top of Claypool and, of course, Deontay Johnson. I think that's going to lend itself to a pretty decent week for Ben Roethlisberger. Number 3 is going to be Teddy Bridgewater taking on the Washington football team. Washington actually gives up the most fantasy points to quarterbacks. Teddy's been good, not great, but he does get Jerry Jeudy back this week. Ton of weapons. Everybody on that Denver offense can score. We saw both running backs score last week. We know what Courtland Sutton and Noah Fant can do, and now you see Jerry Jeudy return. I think it's going to be a big game for Teddy, but he's still only number 3. Number 2 is going to be Carson Wentz taking on Tennessee. Wentz has been very solid this year. He didn't put up a lot of big numbers last week in the weird weather game against San Francisco. This is going to be, I think, a little bit more of a higher scoring game. Tennessee still gives up a ton of points to fantasy quarterbacks. I think it's another decent day for Wentz. Michael Pittman should have a field day going against that bad Tennessee secondary. And number 1, the stream of the week, I'm going back to the well, Daniel Jones taking on the Kansas City Chiefs. The Chiefs have flat out been a train wreck. We've all seen it. We saw what Tennessee did to them last week. We've seen what pretty much everyone has done to that defense this entire season. We hope their offense can score against a bad, probably Giants defense. We need that to keep this as a high-scoring game. I think Daniel Jones gets it done with his legs. I think as long as his wide receivers can get healthy, he's going to have plenty of threats to attack this defense. I like this a lot for Daniel Jones. I think we're looking at a top 10 week, and that's why he's my stream of the week. We're going to jump to tight ends. Number 5 is going to be Jared Cook taking on the New England Patriots. The Patriots are actually pretty good against tight ends in fantasy. They have allowed 2 touchdowns this year. I'm basing Cook on volume, and that's really what you want to chase when streaming tight ends. I think I've said that every week this season. Cook, while being the 4th option in this offense, does see 6 to 7 targets a game pretty easily. That's all you can ask when you're looking for a guy that's around 50% available in a fantasy league when you don't have one of the best guys. Number 4 is going to be Robert Tonyan going against the Arizona Cardinals on Thursday. I was all set to call Robert Tonyan a downside this week until it came out that Devontae Adams and Alan Lazard would both probably be missing this game on the COVID IR. Who else is Aaron Rodgers going to throw to? I still think Aaron Rodgers is going to get his in this game. Arizona is going to put up a lot of points. The Packers are going to have to bounce back. That lends itself to another Tonyan touchdown. Tonyan has been awful in games where he has not scored a touchdown this season, but in the 2 games where he did, he was a top 10 tight end. I'm hoping that happens again this week. Number 3 is going to be Dan Arnold taking on the Seattle Seahawks. Seattle's about middle of the road when it comes to the tight end, but Dan Arnold is a pretty steady 3rd target in this Jacksonville offense since he's come over, and he's just getting acclimated and now coming off of a bye week. I look for another 6 to 8 targets out of Arnold and maybe even finding the end zone this week. Number 2, last week's number 1 in all of fantasy football, CJ Zoma taking on the New York Jets. Zoma's going to be a big ad after what he did last week, but he was still available in far too many leagues. I'm not advocating Zoma as an every week tight end one. The Jets are actually pretty good against the pass, but they're even better against wide receivers. Normally, because teams are beating them down so bad, they don't need to use the pass very often. I think Burrow's going to come into this game hot and stay hot. He's not going to need to throw outside as much. I think he's going to take the safe routes with Zoma. We may not see a touchdown, but we may see more volume out of him than we normally do. Number one this week is going to be Tyler Conklin coming off of his bye to take on the Dallas Cowboys. Conklin has been seeing at least 3 targets every game, almost 4 targets every game, and I think he's averaging 5 targets a game, but he's also being used pretty heavily in the red zone. With Dalvin Cook back, they're still going to lean run, but when they're down in the red zone, Conklin is good for a touchdown or 2. He's done it twice already this year, so I really expect to see Tyler Conklin used down there. Dallas should put up a ton of points on Minnesota. This should be a high-scoring game, and it can't all go to the wide receiver, so I like Conklin this week for a pretty big week. I think I have him keyed in as a top 7 tight end this week. We're going to jump to defense, always my bread and butter. Number 5 is going to be the Indianapolis Colts taking on the Tennessee Titans. It's hard to bet against Derrick Henry, but I'm happy to bet against Ryan Tannehill. I don't think we saw a bounce back last week. I think the Colts are going to be able to get after him and force turnovers, and their offense is going to do just fine, as I mentioned earlier with Carson Wentz. I like the Colts in a slow and steady game, couple of sacks, couple of turnovers. Number 4, I was a little surprised was available as much as they were. This is the Pittsburgh Steelers taking on the Cleveland Browns. Pittsburgh has a pretty solid defense, and Cleveland's giving up a ton of sacks. It sounds like Baker Mayfield may be back for this game, but it really doesn't matter who's going to be back there at quarterback. They're going to get hit early and often. Nick Chubb is back as well, but again, that's one of the Steelers' strengths is slowing down the run. They're only available in as many leagues as they are because they were on bye last week. Take advantage of that and get them on your roster. Number 3 is going to be the Chicago Bears taking on the San Francisco 49ers. The Bears offense is putrid and is probably going to put them in very bad situations. It's my only worry, but the Bears defense has stood up to that challenge quite a few times this year already. I expect to see sacks, turnovers. The Bears are pretty decent at stopping the run. That's really what the 49ers have outside of Deebo Samuel. I'm not afraid to play Deebo Samuel. He's probably still going to get his, but sacks and turnovers are going to make this a playable day for the Chicago Bears. Number 2 is going to be the Los Angeles Chargers taking on the New England Patriots. The Chargers are coming off of a bye. They got beat down, if you remember, by the Patriots last year. I think they have a lot to prove. It's a home game, which makes me very happy. I think they're going to be able to score quite a bit against the Patriots. It's not going to be the shutout that we saw last year, which was just bad for Justin Herbert. I think he's going to be looking for his own revenge game of sorts. And I think you're going to see a slowdown in Mac Jones. Really, that offense runs through Damian Harris. As long as the Chargers can control him, sacks, turnovers, low scores. And finally, my number 1 team, the opponent is what makes this the number 1 team. It's the Seattle Seahawks taking on the Jacksonville Jaguars. Trevor Lawrence is going to turn the ball over. They're probably going to allow sacks outside of their 3-4 wide receivers. And what I mean by that is their 4 pass catchers, James Robinson, Dan Arnold, Laviska Shenault, and Marvin Jones. This team is not looking great. I think Seattle's going to be able to control those guys. Jamal Adams should have no problem keeping up with James Robinson, and they'll figure the rest out from there. Seattle hasn't looked great on defense this year, but this is the type of opponent to get right, and it's a home game, which I think is going to be very big for them. Beware of any fantasy analyst who calls the Cincinnati Bengals their stream of the week this week. They are my number 1 defense. They are not a streaming defense. They are rostered in more than 70% of fantasy leagues. If you can find them, great. But if you can't, Seattle makes for a great consolation prize. And that's it this week. So those are my top 5 guys at every position. As I mentioned, my streams of the week are Daniel Jones taking on Kansas City, Tyler Conklin taking on Dallas, and the Seattle Seahawks taking on the Jacksonville Jaguars. Please make sure you hit subscribe, and hit submit on your lineups before those games kick off on Thursday. Make sure you hit subscribe. We're doing subscriber giveaways all the time. Check the link in the description with our partnership with Thrive, and good luck this week, unless you're playing me.